Our next two presenters come to us from Macalester College. They're presenting to us 10 years after progressive changes to the family code, Morocco's rate of underage marriage is still on the rise. Please welcome Hannah Rehak and Will Matsuda.
Okay, so
sorry we're late.
Yeah, sorry we're late. We're 5 weeks late, but I'm Will Matsuda.
I'm Hannah.
And so yeah, we're going to present our research on 10 years after progressive changes to the family code. Morocco's rate of underage marriage is still on the rise. This is actually the title of our article that was published in a news outlet that we're going to talk about later. But we're going to talk about this whole process of research and publication.
Cool. So how did we come to this? So the program we did was SIT Morocco, New Media and Journalism. And when we were looking at programs, Will and I both go to Macalester, like we said, we really didn't know each other. We're in completely different departments. All we knew about the program was that Mary Stuckey, who founded Round Earth Media, which is this really cool collaborative of young journalists and experienced editors working together to report all around the world, that she was going to be our advisor. We knew we'd be spending roughly 4 months in Morocco. We knew we'd have a homestay in Rabat and then 6 weeks on our own to do research, and that we'd be taking classes at the Center for Cross-Cultural Learning. The reason I personally did this program is I'm an English and American Studies double major, and I really wanted, as I'm sure many liberal arts college students know, wanted more of a career-oriented semester, or something that felt more career-oriented. And so I did journalism because it seemed like a really cool combination of my interest in politics and then in writing as well.
And I'm a geography and educational studies double major, but my interest was not so much in either of those areas. I also do a lot of photography, and so I wanted to kind of make more legitimate photos in the realm of photojournalism, and this seemed like a really good opportunity to do that.
So then we ended up taking 3 classes while we were there about ethics of journalism, the context of journalism in Morocco, and we worked with Mary Stuckey, who we knew we'd be working with, but then we also were assigned editors because the goal of the program was to complete an independent study in journalism. So we were doing research, but the idea was that it would be an article that would ultimately be published in a news outlet. So I worked with Ida Alami, who's a freelancer for the New York Times. She's the correspondent in Morocco. And
yeah, and then I worked with Mike Serby, who is a longtime photographer with the main Minneapolis newspaper, the Star Tribune, and also is a pretty frequent contributor to National Geographic. So right off the start, we were doing kind of our own things, and we were writing our own stories and taking our own photos. But we also discovered that me and Hannah got along really well together, and even though we went to the same school, we probably should have been hanging out before this program. So I took a lot of photos, she wrote the text, and we started doing these articles that were posted on the program's website. So this is a story we did, a photo from one of our first profiles of a person in Rabat.
And that's another photo that Will took from our second story, which is actually, this is my homestay mother from the village that we lived in for a week. So that's our second story.
So, but we had to start narrowing down on an actual topic that we're going to really dive into. We had some really wild ideas from the start. Probably the most absurd one was we were really interested in the idea of PDA in Morocco because it's really taboo to show any form of PDA pretty much anywhere except one place, which was the beach, and everyone was making out all the time. So our editor said that was not a whole idea. So we eventually got to underage marriages.
So we wanted to do a story about underage marriage in Morocco. We had heard a statistic that, which is true, that 11% of marriages in Morocco involve a minor, and 99.9% of the time that's a...
89.
No, it was a girl.
Oh.
It was a girl. Yeah, 99.9% is a girl, and then 89% of the time, you have to present to be married as an underage bride. You have to present your case to a local court judge, and 89% of those cases go through. So we learned that, and we were like, that's really interesting, kind of what's going on, what's the context of this, how can we dive into it? So we ran into a couple of problems. We had one contact in Berta, the village that we had lived for a week. My host on the photo you saw. Sabah was our contact, and she was going to help us. She was going to get us contacts of underage brides, and she actually ended up losing her mother like a week before we were supposed to meet with her, and so she of course like was not able to help initially, and then we were trying to get into the Ministry of Family Affairs, and that proved to be really difficult because we were just like 2 American students being like knocking, actively just wanting to get in, and then we wanted to go to Azila, which is a town in High Atlas in Morocco, and that was going to take a lot of time, and we were working with a Moroccan student journalist, and she wasn't going to be able to take off time from the 16 classes that she was taking. So then we were like, maybe we'll do a story about the legalization of marijuana, because there was a big conference happening. But at the last second, Seba actually called us a couple days after her mother's funeral and was like, I still want to help you. She's a women's rights advocate. She wanted to be a part of the story.
So just a little bit about how the journalism process works. Once you have a story idea, and it's coming along pretty well, you start pitching the idea to various news outlets. Which basically means telling them, an editor, why they should run this story. So, like as we already said, we have this first fact that's we thought would be interesting, and I already said we don't need to go over it, and just a little more contextualizing information. So we started sending that out to people once we started working on it.
Ultimately, we I think we did a pretty good job trying to get like a well-rounded approach to the story. We were able to talk to a couple of different judges. The first one was friendly. The other one, Judge Aldani, was tried to be. But of course, we were just like, yet again, kind of coming in, asking them questions. So we talked to a couple of judges about what their role is in the process, learned that really it's a matter of they have to get consent from the young girl, and they talk to the young woman one-on-one, even though they also talk to the family and the groom or the potential groom. And then we spoke with a couple of advocates, like women's rights advocates and organizers in Morocco. So Fatima Magnawi, who is the president of Union de l'Action Féminine, and she just works for women's rights all across Morocco. And Stephanie Bordat, who's actually an American but French law trained advocate working in Morocco. And then through them, we basically had got access to a couple of different sources. We had Selwa and Ghislaine, who were two underage brides who were divorced from their partners by the time we talked to them, and Salima Dakhani, who was a 19-year-old with 2 children who had run away from her husband the night before we saw her.
So this is funny. This is from our end of the program presentation, so we thought we'd keep it in because we didn't know where our article was going or if it was going anywhere. So we presented our story when we pitched it as international, local, and personal. These are like buzzwords. And we were thinking reaching for Al Jazeera, New York Times, Huffington Post, something of that nature. But we left Morocco and we didn't really know where it was going to go. It was kind of in the hands of editors at that point.
But then mid-July, got an email from Mary saying that you can see it in my instant email inbox. The Goalpost is interested. You need 24 hours to do all of your edits. So I had to just like work like crazy, and Will actually nothing. You've already seen his photos; they're flawless. But so then it was nerve-wracking and exciting, and it was a 4-day turnaround, and then it was posted.
So this is what it looked like on the website.
Do you want to talk about it?
I'll talk about it next one. And then also it was recognized by the UN, which was pretty cool. But maybe one problem. Well, we'll talk about some of our problems with it at this point. I'm going to go back to the main image for this is actually not an underage bride, which I think is very misleading. It's a daughter of one of the underage brides, and this is a crazy coincidence, but this morning the editor said that I actually am going to be able to upload the image that I intended to have as the cover for it. So, but for right now, this is kind of problematic because it's annoying that she's not here. She's just a daughter. Yeah, and we also couldn't review the finalized text and photos with their subjects since it went to be printed in the middle of the summer while we were here. So.
Also, getting consent. We just mentioned Salima Dakhani, the 19-year-old. She had walked into Fatima, the organizer, women's advocates organizer. She'd walked into her office to try and get help for that night, like where she was going to stay that night, trying to get representation so she could divorce her husband, and was with her 2 kids. She's on the, actually, she's this woman. And we had been asking Fatima if she could kind of hook us up with any contacts, and she was like, well, this girl like just walked in, you heard the doorbell ring, like that's who that was, if you want to talk to her, and if she's willing to talk to you, and she was willing to talk to us. But of course there's the question of like what state of mind was she in, did she think we were going to be able to do more for her than we can or did do? And we tried to make that clear, but I was doing interviews in French, which is my second language, a rough second language, and a little bit through a translator who was speaking to her in Arabic, and she was answering to me in English. So there's also a question of like translation too. And then also like, are we creating news? Why do we shine a spotlight on this? There's like always a fear, I think, especially with journalists, or I guess any research you do, is like, are you just highlighting like this minuscule thing and making it, I don't know, making it something that it's not? And underage marriages are definitely a problem in Morocco, but like we already said, it's a really low number compared to a lot of other countries around the world. And it's also a really complicated issue, which is what our article on our photos tried to do justice to.
Mm-hmm. And that's also kind of, I also have a lot of problems with, one, that was only the single photo presented with the article, even though I did a whole series. And so, even still, when you are flattening the experiences of all of these women just to the label underage bride, that like they're more than that. They're more than an underage bride. They have all of these experiences.
Which kind of all leads into like, was it our story to tell? And that's something that we still think about all the time.
So yeah, as we've already said, pretty much all of my photos were cut from the final article, which I think decontextualizes it a lot. And same with the captions. They severely cut my captions, which gave the photos and the women a lot of context.
And then, like I've been saying, a lot is lost in translation no matter what, but especially with this content, there's a lot of fear of like fact-checking, rechecking, making sure I was getting it double-checked by native French speakers, native Arabic speakers.
So I'll run through some of the photos real quick. Just the one on the cover. I'll just read some of the captions real quick that I intended to have. But this is the photo that actually is going to be now on the cover of the article, as of this morning. So, Salima Dakani, 19, was married at 16. She escaped a torturous husband, survived electrocution and rape. She married because her father made her. Her father also demanded that she stop going to school when she was 14. Salima is taking refuge in an association in Rabat, which provides legal assistance, shelter, and help with employment.
That was actually about a year ago, too.
Yeah.
Almost exactly.
Rashida Diani is 27, is happy with her marriage and her life. She has 3 children, Ashraf, Tusam, and Ryan, they being Toothy Smiles. But like many other young brides, Diani faced difficulty leaving her home at 14 and adapting to life with her husband's family. So I wanted to show in these photos and in our article that there's a huge range of experiences within the realm of underage brides.
And also most underage brides are married, and so 18 is the age of consent, but most of the underage brides that get married are like 16 and 17. So it's not this like horror story of like 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. Of course there are cases like that, and these 2 were married at 14, but for the most part 16.
And then I also tried to get sort of just life around the village where these women were from. And a recent UNICEF report has stated that it is largely a rural phenomenon. That's the photo that was on the cover. Yeah, there's another. This is just the village. These photos and interviews.
So yeah, what could have been done better? We would have liked to have spent more time with the women. We had like a 2-hour interview session basically when we went to Berta, we went back to the village. So we were able to speak to 3 women over the course of, about 2 hours. But we also had a male interpreter. And so that would have been something that we would have liked to have changed. Sometimes Will was like outside of the room or like away. But we also obviously had to get their consent for him to take the photos. Speaking of photos.
Oh yeah, so I wish because they were underage brides, or what we were doing was kind of taboo. We had to meet sort of secretly in a closed location. We couldn't take photographs in their homes, which would have been a lot better just contextualizing the images.
And we want to travel to the Middle Atlas where there are a lot of underage weddings happening. then this is, follow-up, is it necessary to keep track of the story? We think so. It is an international problem. It is we did get to meet these fabulous women who are doing great and but yeah, we think that it deserves more attention globally.
So yeah, we learned, throughout this process we learned a ton about how prevalent underage marriages are in North Africa, and kind of the legal framework surrounding it with the family code. We also had to jump through so many loops to get through the bureaucratic system of Morocco. We went to so many different ministry offices, and we didn't have the right IDs. You had to have different kinds of IDs to get into it. That's just a testament to how persistent we had to be to pull this off. So we'd like to thank all of these people from our program. Yeah.